Black Hills Information Security, the leaders in penetration testing and active defense. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to request a quote today. Threat Connect is the industry's most widely adopted threat intelligence platform, built to unite the people, processes, and technologies across your security team, your organization, and your entire ecosystem of partners. Threat Connect's threat intelligence platform enables your team to collaborate, analyze, and make sense of threat data all in one place. Empower your team towards fast and efficient analysis that leads to decisive action. Transform your entire threat detection and response program today. Claim your free account at threatconnect.com/securityweekly. Overwhelmed when it comes time to choose which cigar to smoke? Confused by the differences between 60 ring gauge, Robusto, Corona, and Lancero? Do you yearn to try all the new cigars on the market, but need a guide to tell you where to start? Look no further than the Stogie Geeks Show. Hosted by yours truly and Will Cooper, we've made it our mission to educate both new and experienced cigar smokers. Tune in for interviews with leaders in the cigar industry, how-to segments, and weekly cigar reviews. Visit StogieGeeks.com to subscribe to our podcast, watch the live show, and discover our video archives. Stogie Geeks, geeks kicking ash.
And we're back, this time with a very special guest who you've heard in the previous segment, but now a one-on-one conversation, or a one-on-many conversation, with none other than Chris Poulin. Chris is a fantastic guy, and I'm going to let him introduce himself because he can do it way better than I can. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about what you're up to nowadays.
So, right now, I actually work in a large corporation. I do the research strategy. So, basically, what that means is work with a lot of our threat intel guys, try to pull in some interesting research, figure out what we can do. 1 + 1 = 3, make it bigger than it is. But I also work with emerging technologies like IoT, connected car, cognitive computing, all the things that are really sort of amorphous sounding, and try to figure out what they really mean and how to apply badness to them. So
excellent. And so definitely some of these things are near and dear to my heart. Paul and I have talked about what we consider IoT for many, many, many years. As long as we've been doing this podcast. I think the first show we ever did, episode 1, talked about what we now would consider an IoT type device. At the time, it was called embedded devices like printers and cameras and those types of things.
Now it's got toasters.
Yeah, it's toasters and refrigerators and your car.
It's interesting. When I ran a company for a while, built it and sold it, and the consultants that worked for me, I kept telling them way back in the day that we should start focusing a little bit on the physical side of security, and not little green lights and Chevy Citations and things like that. I meant,
Right.
So actually go and work with door badging systems and work with embedded devices and PBXs, start looking at that side of the house. And they just didn't want to have anything to do with it. So it was kind of interesting, 3-5 years ago when the term IoT was coined, and I was like, this is what I was trying to tell you guys. Of course, they don't work for me anymore, so I don't care.
And of course, now they're going, oh man, this would have been $1 million idea, and we stuck with it. Yeah, and they didn't want to get involved in that, and now it's the big thing that everybody's talking about. Yep. And I know you've talked publicly about a lot of the things that we've seen, and there was one quote that I saw from your Twitter stream fairly recently about IoT type of stuff, and it was along the lines of we can't rely on the consumer to secure IoT, that it needs to be left to the manufacturers. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit and embellishing. So what are some of the challenges going into the whole IoT connected car type of space that we're seeing as some significant challenges, both as a consumer and as a manufacturer?
Yeah, so it's interesting because even way back in the day, I worked with Raptor Systems. You guys remember that? Way back. And they actually went from software into hardware. So they produced their own appliance. And they didn't do a very good job of it. And they were good at the software side, not very good at the hardware. So what everyone said at the time was hardware manufacturers aren't good at software. Software manufacturers aren't good at hardware. And the IoT brings together that and consumer and industrial devices all at the same time. So Part of it is just not a solid understanding of the other side of the fence. So car manufacturers are good at mechanical devices.
Sure.
They understand safety. They're good at working with consumer regulation organizations like the UL, et cetera, et cetera. They don't necessarily understand the software side of things, but they also don't necessarily create it. So you've got a supply chain problem, you've got a expertise problem, you've got an integration problem, and then the tertiary problem, or the big problem here, is that you're bringing together something that's an industrial device and you're putting it in the hands of your aunt or the guy who's 80 years old who can't figure out where the gas pedal is versus the brake. And so
Right.
you have to protect them from themselves. If you expose configuration and you say it's up to you to secure this device from being hacked into and driving Andy Greenberg into a ditch, from stealing all your contacts that are now syncing up with your car, there's no way that not even the 95% of the general consumers are going to understand how to do that. Even the security people a lot of times don't take the time to understand what's going on in their phones. I know a lot of security people who don't understand the basic settings. They're like, if I get hacked, I'll just deal with it.
Right. And that was very, very true last week when we were on the show talking about Facebook using the microphone to listen to you real time. And we were literally sitting here on the show looking at the settings on the iPhone going, I don't have a Facebook thing in here. Oh, wait, yes, I do. There it is. It's in this different section. And we look at it and, yeah, the microphone's on. How about that?
Or even like legitimate organizations like the police departments that are now paying for the ransomwares. They're paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000.
Yep.
So that's legitimizing, these particular companies or people that are doing these things.
Yeah, it's true. But it's interesting because I was actually at Pony Express on Monday. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about them is that, and I don't know that this is their stated mission, but the thing that always has been interesting to me is that what's going on in the air, right? There's a lot of stuff that's happening in the air that we can't see. Not just Wi-Fi. There's a lot of people who do Wi-Fi snarfing, but what kind of other RF signals are banging around? If you go to any given industry and you start sniffing all the RF signals, you're going to find a lot of weird devices that talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. But then you take that and you magnify it into applications and all the different settings that they have and all the capabilities. Even, I run an Android and I don't know what applications are doing what. Even when I start looking at why are they doing it, it's not granular enough, but I don't want it to be more granular. So how do you resolve this complexity with security and put it in the hands of the consumer, even us as consumers? And it's untenable. So I don't know what the answer is, but to examine all the problems, because it is sort of on the cusp of where we are right now. It's like cloud, right? Back in the day, everybody said cloud, and everybody was like, well, what the hell is the cloud? And let's throw out the standard definition of what it means, but that doesn't help anybody, right?
Right.
And now it's devolved into the point where at least we understand that, what we're talking about are virtual machines. They could be 3 feet away from you. They could be 300 yards away or miles away from you. It doesn't matter. But at least, so the IoT is still sort of evolving. We don't really know what we're talking about. We don't know who's going to do we care about toothbrushes? What does the car actually mean? Are we really talking about industrial IoT? How about the steel mill in Germany that was hacked? Is that part of the IoT?
Right, or is that ICS, SCADA, or right?
Exactly. And we know about that, right?
Right.
So...
And that draws an interesting distinction for me in that when I do a lot of teaching through SANS and those types of things, that we want to talk about IoT and software-defined radio and all these types of things. And I have a hard time trying to relate this to a bunch of security professionals that are there being and having that class paid for by their enterprise to have to talk to them about securing IoT when it seems that 98% of the IoT type devices are in the consumer market, and these guys don't have one of these products. They're there to secure a bank. What's the sort of ratio that you're seeing for IoT type devices in enterprise or being used by enterprise or being marketed to enterprise?
That's interesting. It depends upon the industry.
Sure.
Obviously. Banking, not so much. They worry about mobile devices, which are not technically IoT, right? But, when you start looking at, obviously, industrial control, manufacturing, and blah, 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 then there's a lot of devices they worry about. But what we're starting to see is that there's stuff that you don't actually know about in the first place. So building automation systems.
Yep.
And I hearken back to the days when I used to pen test for my company, and the first thing you do is you'd go look at the PBX system, right? Because the installers use the same default password.
123.4, yeah, or the default. Yep.
Yeah, it might be per company, it might be per the installer company, it might be the actual manufacturer of the device. But then, they got a modem attached to it, so you do a little word dialing, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody would go, hey, we want to print out the call logs. And they go, oh, let's go buy a HP printer for $500. Wait a minute, we got 100 printers on the IT network. Let's plug that thing in. And so we're starting, that's the thing that I'm concerned about, and I see a fair amount of, is building automation systems that are being cross-connected.
Sure.
And there's some really interesting use cases. For example, in your data center, you want to cross-connect it to the HVAC system because on Friday night, you're going to be running this workload that's a fairly significant workload, a lot of CPU horsepower. It's going to generate a lot of heat, so we want to kick up the HVAC 20 minutes in advance to get the data center up to temperature, or down to temperature.
And oh, by the way, those monitors that are over in the far corners of the data center that are determining temperature in those far corners are Bluetooth, Zigbee, any of those types of things.
Right. So we actually did... in my day job, we did a pen test of a building automation system. And here's the problem is that you've got this clash of people who don't really understand IT security. So those are the building automation people.
Yep.
There's usually three people. There's a person who owns the building, there's the building management company, and then there's the tenants, right? So it's the building management that's sort of kind of in the middle. They're squishy, right? They don't own the building. They're not the tenants. They don't really have a stake except for making the HVAC work or whatever, elevators, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, now even elevators, for example, you don't think about those as being too connected, but they're starting to connect elevators, for example, to your calendaring app for a particular company so that if you have a meeting on the third floor, that they put the elevators on the right place where they expect people to be.
Oh, dear God.
So you can see where this is going, right? It's not.
I didn't know that.
Holovator.com.
You're gonna love stairs very quickly.
Stairs will be connected. It'll be the door or something. I guarantee you. But so the building automation systems, the people who actually install those things, they actually put in a firewall, which was $60 or something from Best Buy. I don't know what the hell it was. So we managed to find a flaw in that. There was some they had exposed the management interface to the outside world.
Of course, because you want to be able to manage it from your desk, right?
From the internet.
Yep. So we found a webmin problem with it. We got in, found that the passwords were stored in the clear, and then they also had a redirect to the building automation system through the firewall, so they could manage it from outside.
Why have a firewall?
Right, and it used the same password as was on the firewall.
Of course.
So we were in there, and then we had access to 20 buildings as a result of that. Because
again, getting the consumer to protect themselves for IoT, it doesn't work.
Right.
Because in this case, the building management folks were the consumers.
Right.
Now, I have a question.
Go ahead, Joff.
Chris. The one industry we sort of brushed past, but we haven't talked about a lot is medical. And the thing that strikes me with IoT is that your patient can have an IoT-like device that collects 24, 48 hours, 72 hours of medical data points that then they can bring ultimately to their physician or specialist for in-depth analysis, which is opening up an entirely new field of diagnosis and essentially opening up an entirely new longer-term data set to doctors, which is going to revolutionize what they do, in my opinion. So, in your work, are you seeing what are you seeing in the medical field where your IoT devices are actually coming in and being connected to the enterprise to facilitate this kind of transaction?
So right now, you're absolutely right. The medical profession is going to a pay per result. Well, they're thinking about it, right? They talk about it. They haven't gotten there yet. But a pay per result model versus a pay per transaction. You don't just go pay $80 to go see a doctor and that's it, right? They're like, here, take a pill and come back and see if you solve a problem. Yeah. It's like, did I solve the problem? Then you get paid. If not, then... So they're thinking about being motivated by connecting through telemedicine to the patient. Patient portals, health exchanges, those kind of things. Right now, the only real technology connection is, Fitbits and connected watches and things like that.
Fitbit, connected watch.
Yeah, I know we all got two things on wrists. And
Pavlok.
Yeah.
Hello.
You're more sophisticated. This one's functional. This is pretty.
Just like girlfriends I used to have. No.
Wait, Joff, this one's functional? Wait.
Oh, wow. They just like flew right off the cliff. Anyway.
I suppress so many retorts on that one. I've learned that as a married man. That's the smart man.
I obviously haven't.
Wasn't one of the biggest, Chris? Wasn't one of the biggest things recently was that the security and safety, along with some of the machines that were being pushed into patients' rooms, right? Where they were doing monitoring, blood pressure monitoring, and something simple. But if you hook up a device, they're often like the saline, even just a saline solution.
Yeah.
Like something, they can control that through the network.
Yeah, exactly. So I think those are mostly connected through Bluetooth. I've seen a few. So the things I've seen hacked, by the way, that are not Fitbits and whatever. And by the way, that Fitbit hack, I was actually at Fitbit a couple weeks ago, and they made a convincing argument that it wasn't actually a flaw in their software. Just
Interesting.
FYI.
Okay.
Not to get too deep into that.
We'll leave that there.
Yeah.
Right?
But there, we've seen Jay Radcliffe, and we've seen Barnaby Jack do insulin pumps, pacemakers. Yep. We've seen the regulated the saline and medical injection. So that you can bypass the regulation. We've seen the telesurgery robots have been hacked, so you can do that kind of thing. But those are, I think that's a little bit of a gimmicky stuff right now. I'm not sure. I don't actually know how that works in practice. Are they using telesurgery robots over general internet connections? I don't actually know that at the moment.
So I think there's an interesting thing there, though, because what you just mentioned were all devices that are essentially statically placed inside of a hospital environment for the most part. I mean, you talked about, surgical robotic stuff. You talked about insulin pumps. You talked about, stuff that's actually instrumentation in a medical environment. But the pivot is going to be stuff that is diagnostic and data collection that's in the home environment that then is going to enter the enterprise via diagnostic download of some sort of data set. And I think it's going to get really interesting from a security perspective, given that model is going to emerge and grow over time. I
agree. The insulin pumps and pacemakers do, I don't know if they do it now over the internet, but they will at some point, right? Right now, they usually you go in and they gather telemetry through a Bluetooth connection and they configure it, they tune it.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, and I'll get back to that, but I want to let you finish.
Okay, but if I was going to attack something, if I really cared about the data, if I either wanted to collect the data, or if I wanted to poison the data, I wouldn't do it through the device in most cases, unless it was just such a soft underbelly that it was easier. The big problem right now is the patient portals and the health information exchanges. So those, if it's on the web and it's centralized, then it's, oh, geez.
The title of the article I just showed Chris was "This Diabetes Activist Hacked Her Medical Device and Made an Artificial Pancreas." So between testing and insulin pump was able to self-regulate, especially during the middle of the night, all connected through a cloud-based service.
Yeah.
But just to kind of pivot on that just a minute, there's an analogy, I think, to the financial industry because years ago the financial industry was more vulnerable centrally, just like you're saying, Chris. The web portals and stuff were problematic, but then that model kind of flipped on its end. They got their act together, and the central resources were much more secured, much better, and so the attackers pivoted towards attacking at the edge, right?
That's right.
So it's going to be interesting to see in the medical IoT space whether that same model applies, that same analogy works its way through.
I think about this model. You're absolutely right. I think about this model, and if the IoT is there's a device that connects across a local network that connects across a global network to a cloud provider, then the user connects to that through a mobile phone or some web app, some web portal. So it's really this big, huge conglomerate of connection points. So you're absolutely right that I think what will end up happening because the IoT is so new is that we can attack a central point right now. A lot of people are not very good at writing centralized web applications. Some are. That's actually a fairly mature model, so it depends. Like Nest seems to do a good job, but some of the new people are just going to choose really cheesy technology. Some guy with PHP is going to create some web app, and it's going to be bad. But eventually, they'll get their act together on that side, and then the attackers are going to have to push towards the edge. And as they push towards the edge, you get less and less benefit for your investment. It might be soft. It might be a softer target. But you get less information. You only get information on a particular individual. That's sort of, I think we talk a lot about how security we're losing, but we actually, I think, are winning to some extent. We defend where the attackers find the most benefit, and we force them into less and less return on their investment until they move on to the next target. And we're at the beginning of the IoT, so it's going to be the next target. Don't get me wrong, but
and now it's just a matter of forcing the attackers down the path that has less return on investment for them.
Right, which means paying for the manufacturers.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're not going to do it proactively in a lot of cases. Auto manufacturers a different story, right? They understand it. And by the way, I have to defend them just because I'm so close to them. They care a lot about security, but it is a complex ecosystem, and cars take a long time from the point of somebody comes up with an idea till it's actually produced, then it gets produced, it puts it in the hands of consumer. So it's about 3 to 5 years from conception to inception. And it's about 14, I think it's 11 point something, or somewhere between 11 to 14 years is the average lifespan of a car. It might go through multiple owners, but they still have to support it through that whole lifespan. So they're like, look, it's complex. It was invented way before we even worried about this stuff. There's an ecosystem of the supply chain for the electronic control units, for everything under the sun.
And ongoing support, and
So, and they're making they're making big strides, but I think the big problem with the auto manufacturers is there's not enough transparency. They don't come out and say, here's what we've done, here's where we are.
Agreed. And I had some involvement, I want to say it was about 4 years ago, with some of those auto manufacturers at a camp for dealing with some of those and college students, hackers, and representative from automotive industry, various.
Was that the Battelle one?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see day one, the folks from industry were kind of like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. And by the end of day 3, they were sitting there on the phone pretty much constantly saying, yeah, they just did this.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just did that.
So it's interesting because that's sort of free QA in a way, right? Security testing. Actually, I went to do a test that was sponsored, and they got people from, I won't mention who made it, but they created an IVI, in-vehicle infotainment system. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's that console that's got that you can turn your heat up and down in the middle of your car.
Right.
And they created that, and they said, okay, we want to get some folks from education, from industry, and come in and pen test this. So we did. There was 12 participants in teams of 4, so 3 teams. Within half hour, we had owned. We were root on the IVI, and it's amazing when you get in there and you start working with these things. And they were super happy that we did that. And but when you get into that, you find that they're controlling audio, they're controlling video. They got a Wi-Fi module. They've got. I'm trying to think of all the things that are in there. There's a whole ton of different modules. Some of them are open source. Some of them are customized by them.
Right.
There is always a connection to the CAN bus from the IVI because you have to for all kinds of different reasons.
Right.
Even power seats, right? If you're doing your power seat on your little IVI, it actually connects to the CAN bus, which connects to
the mirrors, the door locks.
Exactly.
Interior lighting.
And the interesting thing too is with the onset of electric cars coming now is hackers were getting together, white hat, and they were looking at the possibility of through the OMDB port to hack a specialized version of the firmware for the car to increase fuel efficiency.
Yeah.
And they had done so in a particular model of car, again, not wanting to mention that particular model. But the auto manufacturer sued them and said that it was their intellectual property, and that by them changing that, even though they did a great thing for the environment, by them changing that, they're infringing on the copy.
Where's Jack Daniel and the whole right to repair thing?
Right.
Seriously. I mean,
what do we do
not only
now?
they changed it, they improved their intellectual property.
They did, and so that caused a whole problem. So I mean, what are we going to do with? Are we going to have firmware on IoT devices like a toaster? Like my toast isn't toasting, brown enough for me or white enough, like too light for me. Let me just hack that firmware.
Yeah.
we're doing that with routers right now, right? With your own, So
And there's legislation now being proposed that would make that criminal to, and we go through that cyclically anyway. So, but I think, so there's that whole mentality where don't mess with our stuff. And by the way, even with cars, way back in the day, 10 years ago, I had a friend who had a BMW 3. He had it bored out, had this the cylinders bored out, and he had new firmware. They needed to put new firmware in order for it to operate appropriately.
Right.
So people were doing that way back in the day. Anyway, it's not like it's a new thing to do to begin with, and it's required if you're going to modify it. But so here's the question: is it okay for a third party to create a market around modifying cars if it involves software? And how's the liability actually? Who incurs the liability? Because remember now, right? Vehicles are a consumer-based product, so the liability falls on the manufacturer. Forget software. But software has typically been a click-through EULA problem, which all the liability falls on the end user. So if you bring those two things together, that's complicated enough. Now you say there's a third party who's going to modify this thing. Now where does the liability get transferred to? And so the question is, should the manufacturers actually have the right to own the intellectual property for the software because they're now liable for any sort of action that occurs to it? So now, if you want to, here's the model. If you want to actually bore out the cylinders and you want some firmware modification, you're allowed to bore out the cylinders. I don't think you can prevent anybody from doing that. But you go to the auto manufacturer and say, I'm going to provide this through your app store as a piece of firmware to enable my custom service. Right. So is that okay? I don't know what the answer is.
Sounds like classic OEM versus non-OEM product, right? So if a car is really legally defined as a piece of hardware and a specific version of software, that becomes the legal OEM model of what a car is defined as.
It'd be interesting to apply that to that methodology, to that environment.
Well, and it also strikes me that this is a generalized problem in the industry when it comes to life safety issues. I mean, that's where the intersection gets really, really ugly, right? Vehicles, obviously, life safety issues, right? Medical industry, again, life safety issues if you're talking about firmware or software. And you talk about modifying or hacking firmware or software that's related to life safety. Get ready for the bank of lawyers to come running at you.
And no case law at this point.
But and if you look at like a simple computer, to put this into simple perspective for some of our viewers or whatever, if you buy a Dell computer, right, and you run it, and the CPU burns out, and it's under warranty, and it's not through any kind of accelerated use or whatever, Dell will repair it. Right. But if you install an overclocking program where you're cutting across the cycles of the motherboard or whatever, and you overclock, and that causes the CPU, they may not repair that.
Right. The whole change the software to affect the hardware.
But there is a little chance that it's going to explode in your face and kill you.
That's true.
This is true. or run you off the road.
To make it worse, now we employ the IoT stuff. You know?
So interestingly, I end up doing a lot of talks on the particularly connected car to lawyers, which is a bizarre audience. So I spoke at the Better Business Bureau, which is a bunch of lawyers. I spoke at the International Association of Lemon Law Administrators.
Whoa. Okay.
Whoa.
Ayala.
Yeah. But by the way, you would think that would be a completely dry forum. They were some of the most fun people.
Wow.
I've had amazing times.
You've seen Fight Club, right?
Yes.
I can see that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have been discussing all of the complexities of automatically updating stuff for all of that stuff that is life-saving or that could have very high repercussions. Now, what are the reasons that many of the IoT vendors out there for the non-life-threatening stuff to have a way of updating their stuff? A lot of them don't even add that or build that into their infrastructure until some vulnerability happens and they get egg on their face, or in the case like one of the recent vendors, a law was passed, they were found guilty, and the judge actually made them take security seriously and have a way of properly updating devices. You mentioned that many of them actually want to take security seriously, but why doesn't they take the simple step of updating the devices as a first step on all of this stuff? I know I've done a lot of home automation and I've dealt with other stuff, and they don't have a way of updating many of those components.
Because they don't think about software. It's that simple, right? And if they did pay attention to security, and security is always an afterthought. People don't build it in at the beginning, no matter how much we talk about it. But here's a story. So I talked to this manufacturer of RFID chips, the ones in passports and credit cards and things. And they were really good at hardware. They understood the hardware. And they wanted to get in the software side. They wanted to actually buy or make the transactional software that, read the NFC transactions, things like that. And so they had me come in. It was in Europe. I go in there and I'm all ready. And I go, okay. So we all know about these 3 or 4 different security incidents that happened. And so then I started going into, all right, here's how I would handle those things. And they go, whoa. We've never heard of any of those things.
Oh, God, no.
So therein lies, and it was all, point of sale systems, hacking, RAM scraping, things like that. So I think therein lies the problem. They're really good at hardware. Going back to the basic premise is that hardware people are good at software. Hardware people are not good at software. Software people are not good at software either, by the way. So it's when you cross, but they understand it, right? Everybody's out there proselytizing that you actually need to do over-the-air updates or over-the-net updates, depending on what kind of a device you have. Tesla, big success story, right? Because they had that problem where they were overheating, and then NHTSA came back and said, look, you guys need to put together a plan and fix this problem. They go, it's fixed. And NHTSA was like, I don't think you understand what we just said. Oh, we understood it. We just pushed out an update, and every Tesla on the road, we jacked it up 2 inches and no more heat problems. And NHTSA was like, we don't understand that. This is not
How did you do that? And we were talking about that just a week or two ago, but there was a vulnerability found in an IoT-based product, IoT-type product, and within 24 hours, they had every device that was online patched.
Yeah.
The door ring bell.
Yes.
Oh, the ring bell, yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So there's an opportunity. It's about education, right? I think the manufacturers, particularly for consumer-based devices, because think about it, it's 2 guys in a garage who know how to. Again, they've done some website development and they grok Python, whatever, and then they go put something together and it works, right? Got a Pi, got some Python. Hey, everything's P. We're good to go.
Great, and we've got a prototype.
And a prototype, yeah. S. We'll worry about S later. Security.
Yeah, it also has to do with a lot of the mentality of, we need an MVP, minimum viable product, to get out there.
Exactly.
And then once they get that minimum viable product out there, they forgot, we should have added this in ahead of time.
We forgot MSVP, minimum secure viable product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they forgot no network interface. Oh, no micro USB interface. Oh, not even serial, so we cannot update this shit.
But, it turns out that most of them have a serial interface, some sort of micro USB, and what is it, a J19 port, I think is what it is. It's actually required by the UL for testing. It's a test harness, effectively. I think it's a J19.
J19 for JTAG?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're required to have all those things, but they usually come on whatever commodity SoC that they buy, right? System on a chip, or whatever sort of board they buy if they're embedding some sort of nano Arduino, although I don't think anybody's actually producing stuff with nano Arduino in it. But the point still being is that whatever they're producing, they've got all that stuff in there. They just don't think about the update. They're used to going into the lab and cramming something into it and pulling telemetry and updating it. But yeah, over the air, it's after the fact.
Yeah, and that becomes we're going way over on the interview, and that's fine because we don't have a lot of news stories this week because Paul's the one that puts all the news stories in, and I've only got a couple. But that really is interesting to me, given that I wasn't sort of aware about and I'm shocking myself that wasn't aware of the requirement for testing from folks like UL to have something like JTAG available on the board. And I'm wondering, does that apply to devices that are sent to UL, like the development stuff, or is it UL expects to be able to go to pull any device off the shelf, take it back to the lab, test it?
I don't know that they do anything. And by the way, it might not be UL. It's some regulatory
some regulatory agency.
Yep. But yeah, I don't know that they necessarily do it, but it has to be built in just for that the maker has the ability to go in and attach a test harness and pull data off it and figure out. Well, I'm not entirely sure. I just know that one of the ways that we've looked at getting into stuff or actually sniffing off data is through the JTAG.
Right. And that's always been my reaction of every consumer device out there that has a system on a chip of some variety has JTAG ports on the motherboard, whether they're broken out to a header or they're left as test pads or something of the like. And my argument is always the manufacturer should not have these exposed. They shouldn't be wired. They shouldn't be traced on the board. Nothing. You've got to make them work to get it. And
I think they're required in production.
And if it's now required, and now that it's potentially required in production, like, well, my recommendation will never fly because it's required. It's required by some mandate that it actually needs to be there.
But there might be, and I would have to go back. I read this about 6 months ago, and I didn't know a lot about JTAG at the time. So I got to be honest with you. I've just been what I read at the time. I sort of stored it away, and but I don't know exactly what the requirements are, but there should be at least some way. Look, you've got the JTAG capability. Maybe you can disable it in some way. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know, but I think that actually violates the whole concept, which is you need to get down in the board quickly, jam something in, and so I don't know.
I did have me thinking about that as well. If you need to jam something in, maybe you need to do that at a different stage in the production.
Yeah.
So.
And in terms of regulatory oversight, as IoT becomes more and more global, or increasingly global, I think about, should there be some sort of consortium of people that create global standards for these devices? I mean, I think about I'm an amateur drone pilot, so I think about how I'm able to operate on certain frequencies within the United States, but if I take that drone over to Canada, I can't operate in those frequencies, and I have to change the band in which I'm operating in.
Sure.
So, how do we protect? How does, as a manufacturer of a large scale, line of IoT devices, how do we protect ourselves globally or universally, for these particular things? And should there be a third party oversight committee that pen tests and does all these things in those environments?
CyberUL.
What is it?
CyberUL.
Wow. It's interesting because there is no global oversight committee for anything else, quite honestly.
Right.
So is the IoT the watershed technology that actually drives that? I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because we have consumer products that cross boundaries, and I don't even know how they deal with it, quite honestly. But if we produce something in the U.S., we have to produce a UK-based model. We have to create one for the Asia Pac. So I think it's sort of the same thing, and maybe that's the way we have to deal with it. It's complex, don't get me wrong, but I like the idea, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. People don't play nice together in the same room, for God's sakes. How they play together
globally, right?
Yeah, forget about globally, right? I mean,
We can't do it nationally.
so I was going to say we can't play nice across states in the U.S. Yet alone in the same room. So yeah, forget about it.
So gentlemen, we're pushing quite a bit of time on interview, which is awesome. It's been great discussion, and quite honestly, I'm shocked at myself because Paul is usually the interview guy, and I think this went swimmingly. So I'm so proud of myself. But I would be.
Larry's taking all the credit.
I know. And Paul usually takes all the credit. No, I'm kidding.
I know, right?
But there's one group of questions, Chris, that we want to ask you that I'm sure you've probably heard. We have a group of questions. We didn't ask you how did you get your start in information security, and that's okay, because we went right into the meat. But we really want to ask the 5 questions for Security Weekly.
Oh, good God. I told myself I was going to prepare for these, but I did not.
Good. Good.
Why nobody ever does? We prepared. We bought the domain.
We do.
I know. You should send a PowerPoint with the 5 questions.
Wow. All right. So, Chris, 3 words to describe yourself.
That's one.
Yeah.
No.
I'm an optimist, I'm an autodidact, and I am also a cynic all at the same time.
Interesting. I get to do this. I get to go speak to my daughter's 2nd grade class, and they said, and one of the kids asked, give me a couple of words to describe yourself. And I'm like, yes, I practiced this. and the teacher was the only one that laughed.
Did you use the word autodidactic?
No, I said tall, handsome, and a liar.
In which order?
That order. Tall, handsome, and a liar. All right. So if you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Poison. Poison. Ooh, I like things that people aren't expecting. That is
that they would. Yes. All right. If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Oh, good Lord.
There you go. That's a perfect title.
I like that.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know what that would be. It would be insert title here.
Perfect. In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
.net.org.com.
Yes. Now, you may not be familiar with Ask Grabby Grabby because we hear it's significantly more popular in Europe.
Yes, but explain to me what you think it is.
See, that's the magic, is that you have to make up in your mind what the game of Ask Grabby Grabby is.
I see. All right. So, do I want to go first or second? I want to go second.
Okay.
I want to one-up the person who goes first.
That's the magic of the question right there.
You missed the whole conversation about fingering Uranus.
Well, whether you go first or second, that's not off the table, right? So,
right. All right. So the final question of the 5, with 5 questions to Security Weekly, is choose 2 celebrities to be your parents, alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh, that's very interesting. Well, I don't know if you would consider him a celebrity, but Richard Branson.
Oh.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He's a celebrity. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a guy who gets stuff done.
Yep.
And I know that somebody said Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, but I think that's just such a cop-out. And it's just so wrong. Being hot for your mom is so bad. You do not want that to happen. So I would have to be a comedian, actually. I'm trying to think of who that would be. I like funny women. So we pick a random comedian who's...
Gilda Radner.
Wow, that was an old one, right? Yeah.
Showing my age.
I know. I'm trying to think of somebody new, right? So new one. Actually, I always liked. She was on Saturday Night Live, and her name is escaping me now. Of course, that doesn't help anybody at all. Anyway, whatever, a comedian. So we'll leave it at that.
A female comedian
From Saturday Night Live.
From Saturday Night Live.
or
there
a
you
female
go.
comedian. Excellent. Margaret Cho.
No.
Tina Fey.
Tina
Tina
Fey.
Fey. There you go.
All right, I'll take Tina Fey. Tina Fey is actually funny, and she's cute.
So why Branson? Why not Musk?
Well, I've always liked Richard Branson because he came from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people who were successful and they always had a leg up. There's always this mystique around them. Oh, they came from nothing. But then when you dig into their past, they had a rich dad or whatever.
Yeah.
But Branson, no. And plus, he has an island in the Caribbean, which is awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. And to throw that out there about coming from nothing, when Wired magazine first got started, I remember reading an article with interviewing Richard Branson, and if I remember correctly, one of the things that he said was that it wasn't until sometime in college or thereabouts that he learned to read.
No kidding.
Oh, wow.
My understanding was that he was illiterate until the time he reached college, or somewhere in there.
You truly did come from.
That's fascinating.
Like he literally couldn't read all the way through high school.
But he
I
never,
think he had massive dyslexia problems, if I remember
Could be.
correctly.
but he never went to college, I thought, or he never graduated,
Right,
perhaps.
so college time frame.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
All right. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a treat. It's been a pleasure, and hope you can come back again sometime and join us.
I will leave earlier, but thank you. This is awesome.
All right. So, with that, we'll take a few minutes. We'll come back, talk about stories of the week.